Hey everybody, I am Jennifer Slauson-McNett, and I'm here today to talk about uncovering and overcoming barriers to innovation. Now, I know any of you who are involved in innovating anything experience no barriers, but we'll talk about what you might encounter, how you might overcome them, and in general, what some tools and solutions might be for you to have an effective go at innovation, how to partner, how to collaborate, and how to get and achieve exactly what you're looking for. So first, just a poll in the room. Who here would define themselves as an innovator? Show of hands? Okay. And those who aren't sure or wouldn't use that definition, would you say creator, designer, developer, marketer? And of all of those of you who've participated, I assume some of you are looking at business plans and models, forecasting new opportunities, looking at fundraising and asking for growth, for funds, for partnership, and in some form are contributing to innovation out for your organizations out in the world or for your own business. So I see all of you as innovators here today. My innovation story is one, if I look back, I was not planning to be an innovator. My dad, back when I was preparing for college applications, had said, do you want to go into business or computer programming? And I said, neither. I want to get paid to talk for a living. So I went to Purdue to get my BA in liberal arts and studied communications, literally thinking I'd get paid to talk. But I started chancing into, as I started my career, I started chancing into some really interesting spaces where it was white spaces or challenging spaces, problems to solve. And I found, wow, that's way more intriguing and uses more parts of my brain than I'd expected. Get to use analytics, I get to use the chance to sort of look at the world, society, and how we can grow and use tools that I had built along the way. So innovation was not a planned path, as we may discover in our innovation process also. But I've worked at places like AARP, developing member services, benefits, and the seal of approval program. I also worked at Amazon as a product manager, program manager, and in a variety of functions on the business and technical sides. I've worked at Zulily and now T-Mobile also as a product manager. And thank you for those of you who've been in my life who are here to support me or see if maybe she was not sure what she was up to those days. But really what I'm doing now also, in addition to building, I love the building and development and working with customers and solving problems. I also love helping people unlock their own barriers. So I've been a trained coach and also through Seattle Coach and am working to help others unlock their own barriers, entrepreneurs, organizations, and others. And my energizer, so that's my education, my experience, and my energizer is really helping people unlock those barriers. And Teen Tix folks here today, you'll hear a little story about them and their experience, what they're doing. And what we're really doing is unlocking the future and how we can better track and provide access to the arts for teens. But it was an accidental story, if you ask me. And Reinvention Space is what I'm using as my platform to help people unlock their potential. So you're all here to learn something besides, yeah, these are the barriers I face or don't face. But I'm really here to walk you through some definitions of innovation, also some barriers, common barriers people are experiencing, some success factors to help reduce or eliminate those barriers. Walk you through also some tools that you can learn. You may already be using several of these tools, but you may have some. I hope you all walk away with at least one new tool you can use out in the day. And then finally, along the way, I'll sort of filter in some innovation profiles, some stories of people who face their own barriers and what they're doing present day, how they're unlocking them. Okay, so let's talk about some innovation basics first and foremost, the definition and the importance. What of the general definitions you think about for innovation, how would you define innovation? Any ideas?
New and relevant.
Challenging status quo.
Improving. I would say something that moves our story forward. Thank you.
These are all examples. Among other various definitions out there, the idea of a new idea, method, or device, process, program, system are all encompassing in the definition of innovation. But why is it important? For those of you working on innovation, which is everyone in the room we discussed, why are you innovating? What is important about that? Make impact.
Moving the world forward.
Yeah.
Making things easier.
It's enabling growth. It's enabling and unlocking how people can evolve. It's a creation, and it's creating impact, all the things you all just said. There are some interesting notions out there. There's actually a professor at Kellogg School of Management, Professor Benjamin Jones, who just released a paper on the average age of entrepreneurs. And even Einstein back in the day said peak innovation occurs before 30. So anyone who's over 30 may as well get up and go. But technically, the study shows it's actually 40 and on is when people start really seeing their first breakthrough, especially in science and technology. And so it's important to keep in mind there's so much more innovation to come as an individual and as teams. And there's an important rise in collaboration and innovation. There's an increase in the number of patents by teams versus just solo actors out in the world. So there's just an importance in collaboration and partnership in order to achieve your innovation goals. So in Together, we do create. So I want to highlight TeenTix for a moment as one of our profiles. Monique, our executive director for TeenTix, she shared her innovation story with me, and she said, well, I really don't define myself as an innovator. She's naturally been curious. She's been out there exploring things and will follow the thread. And when she joined TeenTix as the executive director, almost 3 years ago now? 2 years ago now, she had come from innovating in other places, building new content, and had the chance to look at TeenTix and how we are engaging teens to provide better access, easier access to the arts. The core problem technically that they're trying to solve is called Teens Count. Teens Count is a program that is really looking at a technical solution to get better data on what teens are actually going to. And TeenTix has 75 partner organizations in the arts in the Seattle area and expanding, and really trying to make it really easy for teens to engage. And why is that important? Teens, are at an influential age and can form a relationship with art and create a voice for themselves and figure out how do I understand what's happening in art and have a voice, not only around art, but in the world. And so the work that they're doing is incredible, and they're enabling partners through this program with a pass that enables inexpensive tickets for teens. Teens Count is enabling data and insight into what the teens are doing. What are they going to? What matters to them? And how do we better talk to them individually? Now, how is that? That's a complex, awesome problem to solve and has a lot of implications. So the way that Monique and the team has been solving this is talking to a host of partners, their partners they're working with, developing a volunteer team to really work on the development of not only an app solution, but also how do we track that, how do we protect the privacy of the teens, and how do we connect and communicate with them. And so there's some great work that they're doing. Now, what barriers did TeenTix and Monique comment on that they found? You're going to find some common themes here. So funding is a natural problem, and in part that's an output of the activities you put in. You can't control the funding you get, but you can control how many people you talk to, who you talk to, your pitch, a host of things you can put into it. And staff capacity. As a small organization serving a host of partners and 54,000 teens? 56,000 teens. That's a big effort. And so to do that technically at scale is really important. And so what has Monique and TeenTix been doing? They have been open to feedback, willing to explore. They have been building a diverse volunteer community, as I mentioned, and they've also been partnering really well with their partners and figuring out how do we test, how do we get our first steps going and build momentum. So TeenTix is doing it. And Monique's advice was stay curious, among other things. But one of the great things, always stay curious, keep learning, keep doing. Okay, what can be innovated? We talked a bit about this, so this feels like a cheat question, but let's throw it out. What can you innovate? Everything? All right, we'll just cut to the chase. Products and services. 15 years ago, did anyone imagine having a smartphone in their pocket for everything that you cared about in your life? Or doing your own tax prep, potentially? I don't know who in the room does that, and I don't anymore. But channels, delivery, and payments, Amazon is innovating on all of these fronts. And even 20 years ago or more than that, did you imagine buying so much that you might online or having things delivered to your doorstep? Did you imagine convenient payments at point of sale? Yeah. And business models. Who in this room has used Airbnb? So putting your property up on Airbnb or finding a property that's really unique and interesting to you at a variety of places around the world, incredible. Incredible way to serve yourself and find a great home and have a great experience. Team structures and learning methods. When you all started work, did you imagine remote work and distant teams or global learning, online learning? So many of these things are changing the way that we interact with one another and how we learn and how we work. So my next feature here is Matt Zell, one of my fellow peer coaches in the Seattle Coach program. He is a serial entrepreneur, as he would define himself. He is the founder and former CEO of Zoom Enterprises. And he sort of came from entrepreneurial roots. His mom enabled and encouraged expression and creativity. And so he's more of a scientist. So he said, maybe it was young hubris, but I actually, didn't actively seek advice. I wanted to just go do. I always had a hypothesis. I wanted to go test it, and I just wanted to do it. I needed to do. And so he was working on behalf of a parochial school and started to find ways in which they were overpaying for non-fundraising activities for a fundraising function. And quickly he figured out how to get more money for them and have them pay less while he worked less, and created a program that was actually sellable to other schools. He then built his own venture, bought his own print shop, and then quickly in 2 years had secured 43 different schools that he was supporting. How did he innovate? What did he face? Well, it's kind of similar challenges for a nonprofit and a profit. Funding and staffing are similar problems. But how did he solve those problems? He actively grew intentionally. He said he had a bootstrap budget. I said, how much was your budget? He said 0. I said, well, how did you get started? And he said, literally step by step. I just got going. And because I needed to move, I just took the steps. And so he walked me through how he did that. He also put clients first, which set him apart in the market. He also passed on clients when it's really tempting to take the money in the clients, when it was really important to just stay focused on the right clients and put them first. That allowed him to recruit the best talent, retain them, and also provide great benefits and a great culture. What was his advice? He said, let intuition lead the way and trust yourself to take the leap. And he did say, take advice, but from the right people. So, it's okay to face the naysayers. It's good to realize you'll have some people who aren't necessarily always in your corner, but figure out what's the balance of that you want to maintain, and who are the right people who will champion you. All right, common barriers and success factors. Let's talk about those. Who in the room, first of all, has experienced a barrier to innovation? Many of us. Okay, well, we'll talk, and this list is not exhaustive. There may be some that don't relate, but I think, I venture to guess many of you have experienced at least one on this list. And if you didn't, I will really want to meet you or talk to you. One thing that we mentioned earlier is you can't control all the outputs. So you can't control all the funding that you get, but you can work really hard to get the right funding and target the right people. You can't control consumer buying behavior, nor can you control perception. But you can control what you prepare, what you invest, and what you execute, and how you do all of those things. So among the areas that we can control, there are some similarities in startup successes and failures. And entrepreneur.com and CB Insights, which focuses on private ventures and organizations, talk about some common barriers. So what are they? Not assessing the market need or interest. So surprisingly, things may go to market without any information about what's the competitive landscape? Do customers want this? Is there an existing model out there? Where can I innovate? Building or maintaining the wrong team. Now this can mean a lot of things. It's a bit loaded, but the idea here is that if you don't have a diversity of skill sets, or you don't have the right skills, whether it's volunteers or full-time team members, you may run into a trap where you aren't able to move forward the way that you want. So having the right team and being ready to evolve, plus develop that team. If there's a skill gap or there's new information, how do you make sure the team is staying current? And delivering a poor quality product or service. Now, anyone in technology also knows this whole minimum viable product phenomenon. Sometimes to get it out, this is not about perfection. This is about what is the right amount of quality to get the feedback as quickly as possible, and then to have a plan to iterate and evolve or pivot as needed as you get feedback. But sometimes just putting something out that's poor quality too quickly, or waiting too long for the perfect product and then actually missing the mark could also be a problem. Being overcome by too much pride or fear. So we may personally have felt any one of these things. Sometimes it's overconfidence. You may feel really confident that you've been in the industry, you know the market, you know the customers, but there's something maybe you were missing. So there are questions around how do you keep that information in sight? What do you need? Not focusing or following through. It's really easy to be tempted by new ideas, and new ideas are important, but you need some sort of process around how do I let new ideas in? How do I stay focused on the things I've committed to? And how do I keep the small, most important set of things that I need to go after? Not listening to customer feedback. So this doesn't mean just collect it. It means collect it, capture it, understand it, and keep doing that. It's a rinse and repeat. It's a continual cycle. And without that, it's really hard to know what's working or not. And data is definitely really important. Look at what customers are doing. Are they buying your product or service? Are they investing? Are they giving you direct qualitative feedback? And if you don't have those things, how do you get that? and not building a business model. That one might sound strange, but I remember being in a brainstorm session. I won't name the company, but I remember being in a session where it was mostly with engineers, and I was in the mix of business and marketing. And I remember a lot of solutioning, and the ideas were phenomenal on how we can evolve the product. But I remember being the one voice to say, but who's going to buy that? Who's interested? Is there a way to sell that? And it was interesting to see the mix and the reactions in the room. So figure out, what's your model? And the term sustainable could be something to say, sustainable for how long? Is it something that can stand the test of time, and can it evolve? Insufficient marketing investment. This is also not just about how much money, it could be on the wrong things. So what is it that you want to achieve? Who do you need to reach? Who's your target market? And then how do you make sure you reach those people and you continue to invest in the things that are working? You stop to evaluate what isn't working, and then you pivot as needed. Not collecting enough support. So this is more about having champions, advocates, sponsors in your organization, outside your organization. How do you get, if you're looking for funding, for example, how do you make sure that you have people who are supporting you? How do you know that they're behind you? What conversations are you having? How are you convincing them? And how are you bringing them along on the journey? And then finally, not evolving as markets and needs shift. And this is a tough one, because there may be something that's really worked, and you may feel like it's still working. And I see a forecast for the foreseeable future that this will continue to go. But if you don't evolve, if you don't pay attention to the signals, we talked a little bit about how do you stay in touch and stay current. If you don't keep, Amazon has something on keeping the competitors in your periphery, but staying focused on the customer. And that phenomenon is really important, because it's really about who are you serving and who is really investing in you, whether your customer may be your investors. Your customers may be people buying your product or service. But if you don't see what's happening on the sides, are things shifting, you could get left behind. This next story is about someone I knew at Kellogg School of Management, and her whole thing is she came from an entrepreneurial background. Both her parents were entrepreneurs, and she was very inspired to go that route, but she first wanted to be successful coming out of school, meaning she wanted to have some cash in her pocket, she wanted to create opportunities for herself, and so she went down more of the corporate path. She ended up, and she was also an active adventurer and also an avid athlete. She experienced an injury that put her out of work and required 18 months in a wheelchair and physical therapy. And it led, as she said, to depression, self-pity, and some really strong feelings on, I don't know what life looks like. And she wasn't walking during that time. So she started to question her belief in what could the future look like. Out of necessity to sort of take herself out of that environment and make sure that she was sort of living the life that she needed and putting one foot in front of another, she actually started to evaluate, well, what nutrition do I need to stay healthy? How do I make sure that I'm staying active while in this circumstance? And how do I help others in the process? She leaned into her entrepreneurial roots and built a company called Baobab, and it's based on a plant that is actually really known for its antioxidants and superfood properties to actually aid to healing. Not long after building this, she actually before that tried to start an internet startup, but she ended up not launching after all, which sometimes is the right decision. But she ended up launching this company. She's selling on Amazon and out there figuring out what her next level of growth plans are. But she had said that this is the thing that really gave her faith, that there's something more. She also said when you run into challenges, you have to persevere, you have to be persistent, and you have to keep perspective. So for her, financial and personal boundaries and barriers were what she faced, but her commitment, perseverance, and her faith were what kept her going and stayed strong. So her advice is stay focused, keep perspective, and build your community. Okay, so the success factors that you can control are almost kind of the antidote, if you will, or the antithesis of the barriers. They may seem obvious, but I think if you start thinking about what does it mean, how do I get that, and what is it that I need, and where am I missing something, I think that can give you some thought on where can you dive deeper. So collect market feedback and test your ideas. We talked a bit about don't wait for perfection, but figure out what is the right quality, using the right diverse team, and build trust among that team. So having a strong team is good, but you also need to be able to be vulnerable with one another, challenge each other's ideas, but do it respectfully, and do it where you're valuing each other's contributions. We talked a bit about quality of product. So again, it's not perfect. It's about what is the right quality at the right time, and how do I continually look at that and invest and evaluate what is the quality this needs to be, what's acceptable, and how do I know? Collect informed advice. I mentioned my esteemed colleague Matt, who said, my young hubris may have kept me from getting feedback. But he did say, look, there may be some informed feedback and advice that you can capture out there. Decide who those people are and be thoughtful about that. And then take calculated risks. We're not saying jump off the ledge. I was telling Kimberly a story earlier, and a couple of you know the story about the bungee jump I took, which I may never do again. But if you prepare, you get ready, and you stand at the edge, you are 90% there. At some point, that 10% is you just jumping off, and only you can push yourself off that bridge. But be safe enough. Know what you need, be ready. And then take the risk and trust yourself. You also need to maintain that discipline and stay focused. For each of you, it may be something different. What is it that you need to stay focused, to have a rigor around what it is that matters, but also allow new ideas to flow? Collect and respond to customer feedback. Be thoughtful about it, what it means, and know that 1 point of feedback out of 42,000 doesn't mean that you have to fix it. Understand what it means, figure out what you need to do. And then we talked a bit about the business model. So craft a business model in general and figure out what's sustainable and for how long, and continually evaluate that. Maybe not as frequently as you're evaluating your product, especially if it's a new product feature or it's a new business. But definitely figure out and give yourself sort of signals to assess, is this still working? Do I need to shift? Is my funding, are my funding sources the same or are they changing? What's the landscape? And invest in marketing and the right marketing that achieves your goals. And as you evaluate, you may find, hey, wait, that didn't work. And that doesn't mean it's a failure. It may mean you learned something. But take that learning and apply it to your investments. Build support and partnerships. We talked about not having enough support or not partnering. If you're not collaborating, that can also be problematic. We talked about invention and innovation is rising in teams. So being able to collaborate is really important and getting feedback. And then finally, stay relevant and resilient, and to enable yourself to evolve. And what that looks like is going to be different for each of you. But understanding where you want to take it, and if you're running your own businesses, deciding what is my exit strategy could be just as important as how do I grow this to the next level. For each of you, it may be different. And then the final profile here is for Chinelo Okonkwo, the founder of Luxie Maison. It is an artisanal home fragrances product, starting with candles, available for sale now, where she is really trying to invent the home fragrances in home and give you a sense of comfort and healing, especially in this chaotic world that we live in today, and to engage your senses and experiences. The top barriers she talked about, and also just a little bit of her background. So she came from an entrepreneurial family also. The theme here is not that you can only be an entrepreneur if you came from an entrepreneurial background. Remember Monique's story. If you're curious, if you're creative, if you like to innovate, there are lots of ways people get there. But Chinelo came from an entrepreneurial background, so it was an anomaly in her family to go the corporate route. And she always felt a little bit out of her skin. And so for 10 plus years, she was not yet fulfilling the thing that she wanted. And then she, in her last job, had created this great opportunity, opportunity called Gig at AAA, which was a point A to B car sharing solution. And it was, a space that had a number of competitors, but she created something that was unique and differentiated. She was also a former strategy expert and director, so she understood how to evaluate the market, how to look at the landscape, where is there opportunity in space. And she used that skill set to assess the home fragrances market, which she explained was highly fragmented. And that market, though, however, had niche players who were quite successful, and those players, and also the market was seeing double-digit growth. So knowing that allowed her to have the confidence to say, okay, I haven't done this, but I can do it. And by the way, she's handcrafting them in her apartment in California. She is really doing this. But her barriers were financial, competition, and product readiness. And for her, packaging was key, because if it's a luxury product, she really wanted everyone to have the experience of a luxury product, and she continued to change and evolve and enhance before she tested that product. What set her up for success was her vision and her permission to test this out and to just take the risk. She really took a product-driven focus, not just a marketing focus. It was all about the handcrafting and the unique sense that she created. She also developed a partnership with a seasoned marketer and someone who could lend her the extra experience. And she's also a marketer, but it allowed her to focus. And she was willing to collect feedback. So she had collected a survey. She also had a test event, and then recently had her first trunk show. And she had her highest sale day on that trunk show day. So she's been testing, expanding, and willing to iterate as she goes. And her whole thing was about agility to evolve. Her advice was start small, but start. That is key. And don't let fear get in the way. All right. the Innovators Toolkit. Many of you, I'm sure, use some tools today, whether it's you have classes or workshops or things that you're using or doing, or you may have resources you use. I'm going to share some things that may be helpful for you. And I kind of look at this, and again, this isn't exhaustive, but the three sort of top things I look at is knowledge and the team. Is the team prepared, and do they have what they need, and how do you supplement that through process, programs, tools, courses? And guidance. Do you have the right support inside and outside of the organization? Are you getting what you need from the people you need, and are you seeking the advice from the people who really know or who could give you a sense of what that path could look like? And support. There's more than one path to support. I'm recommending coaching as a main path, in part because of the coach training I have, and I'll walk you through the value. For some, they might find talking to a counselor could be useful, depending on what your barriers might be, but I won't go in depth on that topic. For knowledge, we talked about hiring the right team, which is important, but you also want to develop that team. You want to engage them, keep them engaged, and keep them learning and staying current. So the top three things, not that there aren't others, are really around once you have that engaged team and keep them prepared, you've got the market and customer interest. You ideally have a diverse team and diversity of thought, and then you have trust amongst each other, and then you are assessing feasibility and quality together, and challenging one another if you need to debate what the end outcome or start might look like. For guidance, many of you may have mentors, even sponsors you talk to and keep you moving on your career path or within your business or within how you do your work. There are a host of experts out there as well, subject matter experts that may be leveraged. And they can be on a lot of common topics around fundraising and growth plans, general business management and operations, as well as team recruitment and retention. And then finally around support, again, I'm highlighting coaching as a key highlight. And in part for anyone who hasn't leveraged a coach, and I don't mean someone on the basketball court or the soccer field, I'm talking about someone who's sitting with you in whatever you're experiencing to really help you unlock any barriers you may be experiencing, whether it's in life, career, work, product, innovation. And things that we'll walk you through are things like being prepared, get to the edge of that bridge, be ready to jump. So launch, evolve. Also, how to build trust when you might find it's broken or you don't know how to build it. How do we get you started? And how do you get that support? And then finally, we all deal with uncertainty with innovation in the changing world. So how do we help you navigate that? For resources, there are a few things I just want to call out. For literature, many of you are probably quite familiar with The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. This is really about talking about ideas that are really on the verge of something, and it could be on the negative, you could be looking at epidemics and how does that get started, but also how do people get ideas going and what really leads to that tipping point. Hooked is also somewhat similar, but this is by Nir Eyal, and he talks about, as a founder, he wished he knew some really practical guidance on preparing your product, whether it's design, product, development. So this is really practical for those of you building a product itself or a service. Harvard Business Review has a host of great tools, and they have a kit on innovation, and they're basically the top 10 innovation articles that have appeared over decades are captured here, including The Discipline of Innovation by Peter Drucker. And it really talks about innovation isn't an accident, it's a planned activity. And there are tools out there and ways and approaches that can help you unlock innovation, to unlock inspiration and creativity. Because sometimes if you're sitting in a room and in a meeting, you're not necessarily naturally feeling inspired just doing. So how do you unlock that? And one of my personal favorites is Brené Brown's Daring Greatly, and it's really what got me thinking about this innovation journey and helping others. And she really talks about developing the courage for vulnerability in organizations and why it's lacking. And how do you think about being vulnerable in the sense of like taking these risks, and what do you need to do that? There are a few podcasts. HBR also has an Idea Cast, which talks about common topics about building support, engaging employees, and similar topics we've been walking through. Anyone familiar with Entrepreneurs on Fire? Anyone listen to that? This one is John Lee Dumas has a series he does every day, once a day. He talks to an entrepreneur, and it really talks about how they unlocked their own success. And so for people inspired by different entrepreneurs and their journeys, it's a great method. And for people feeling stuck or feeling like I just want some new ideas, this could be great for you. An Innovation Hub is really about how we reinvent our world on a variety of topics, humanity, society, and so on. And for people here who are Impact Hub members, I'm sure this could really relate. There are a lot of different topics that can relate to topics you're working on. Who here is familiar with Design Swarm workshops? Anyone go through one? Yeah? So Design Swarm workshops were created by a former director of user experience design at Microsoft, Surya Vanka. and he owns Authentic Design. And this whole phenomenon really was started as like a sprint platform to help people start to address some societal problems. And the whole idea, there's a real detailed model behind this, but the idea is to get people thinking creatively about the problems they want to solve and bringing the core working team of design, product, engineering, and so on, and the business owners to come together to really develop what are your core problems you want to solve, and then how do you go craft them? What are the right approaches? And then start solutioning from there. He works through kind of a gamification and poster process, or a game-like process, and there are sort of 5 different stages of orientation, orient, frame, ideate, iterate, and optimize. And there's 3 of those. If you just want to do the basics, you can do 3 of those, and he walks through exactly. If you have more questions on this process, I'm happy to connect you to Surya. But he has a really great method around this. Education, there's so many sources for general education. I'm just throwing up a couple of starters. So online courses from IDEO include some great topics on innovation, on designing for change, insights for innovation, storytelling for influence, and a host of related topics. They are for a fee, but there's some pretty interesting topics, and you can get a certification if you go through that process. edX, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a conglomerate of university content across premier institutions around the world, including MIT, Tuck, and a host of others. And there's some free content as well as paid, and there are a host of topics on innovation as well. And those are sort of week-by-week series, but they're self-guided, self-paced, so really interesting stuff. There are a couple of conferences. There are a host of, I was just checking out what are the latest innovation conferences, and there are a ton of conferences. And you may have preferences on whether you like conferences or not. A couple of them, South by Southwest is a great one to engage with people on what's on the bleeding edge. And Future Festival also has a host of people bringing things live to the experience. What's interesting about Future Festival is it goes to a host of cities, and they have both a multi-day and a single-day event. So you, depending on level of investment and how you want to engage, that could be useful for you. And then finally, Kellogg School of Management offers a 3-day, I believe, course on culture and leading for innovation. And it's an executive education program as well that they do back on their campus in Evanston. And there are a host of other programs. And I know UW also has a great program out around innovation. And I'll tell you now, they are, in addition to Impact Hub Seattle, they are around our corner in our backyard. And they have CoMotion, which is really about driving innovation through UW and impacting society. An Impact Hub, for those of you who are joining for the first time, this is really about bringing like-minded innovators on a host of topics to solve societal problems, as well as just to move things forward in business and organizations. And we do know, we talked again, people who leverage mentors or other guides, there are a host of resources out there. There are common programs in major corporations and then in nonprofits. As we talked about with TeamTix, they are active in recruiting not only volunteer support, but also engaging their board and an advisory council. There are lots of different methods to engage and get the guidance you need with the expertise that may or may not be in your organization. And for coaching, Seattle Coach is the program of highlight here, has a coaching mindset that really takes this balance of building an alliance with an agreement with your client and forming an agenda together, sort of the triad. And then taking it, think of this as a balance. So you're sort of exploring what's possible, asking questions like, what are your strengths? What have you tried? What obstacles are you facing? And what do you need? Who's supporting you? To experimenting, what could you do? What will you try? Who will you tell? And what are you trying to achieve, and how will you go do that? The value of coaching, for those, again, who haven't experienced coaching, it's quite different from teaching, so from education, from mentorship, and from even counseling. And the reason is the power is even. The coach is there in support of you, in service of you. You are co-creating ideas together. The client is in control of the agenda. You come, whether you bring one to the session or not, you create with the coach. You're in full control. But everything you should do as a coach should be in service of the client. So it's not in service of me. If you went on a vacation to Puerto Rico, I may be curious. And if I asked you how it was, I may be curious to know your experience. I may also want to know for myself. But realistically, coaching is about, how was it for you? What did you get out of that experience? What does it inspire you to do? And then ultimately, we're driving insight and actions. The coachee or the client is accountable for the actions. The coach doesn't accomplish those actions, but we're there helping track your progress. Okay, putting it all together, and then I'll open up to Q&A. The importance of innovation, as you may recall, is about driving growth, change, evolution, and societal impact. And then some key questions I'll leave with you for each of these topics. So where are you innovating today? I just leave these for you to consider as you're here or as you leave. Where are you innovating today? And is there any more impact you can have, either in what you're doing today or what's curious to you and interesting to you? Like Monique said, stay curious. And what are the common barriers? We talked about a host of things that are team-based, preparation, where you're investing, what support you have. What barriers are you facing? As you saw that list, what resonated with you? And what of those are curious for you or interesting to you to explore? Where do you think that putting some of those success factors in place could really help you? Of the success factors, what do you already have in place? I'm sure you each have put some things in place to give yourself credit and acknowledge that you're investing in yourselves and you're investing in that support and your needs. But what else could you do? What else could set you up? Of the innovation profiles, who inspired you? And whose innovation journeys resemble yours? Where can you relate? Who can you learn from? Who could you inspire? And among the items and resources in the Innovator's Toolkit, what do you already have in your toolkit? I bet you have a lot of things. I bet you're pretty prepared, whether you're at the ledge or you're a bit further back. And for those who that's terrifying to, I'm sorry, I can use a better metaphor next time. But what is in your kit and what do you want to add to that toolkit? Okay, I'm going to sort of experiment in the theme of experimentation and innovation. I'm going to turn it to you for Q&A. I'll also do it in a Coachy fashion. So as you ask a question, I'll answer your question, and then I'll turn a question back to you. And if it's something you don't want to answer, you don't have to, much like in a coaching session. So this isn't meant to be a group coaching, but just to try it out. But feel free to also just take the question and say, I'll take that with me. If you ask any confidential questions I can't answer, I will just respond with a question. How's that sound? Shall we try it? Okay. Who has a question?
What is the typical duration of coaching? Is it ongoing? Is it 6 weeks?
Great question. It's really personal to the individual, but as a coach, we aim to create a finite period of time. The idea is not to create a lifelong relationship, not that we don't want you in service of or us in service of you. It could be anywhere from 1 session, which is less common, but like 3 to 4 sessions, 3 to 6 sessions, sometimes 10. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And together, what we often do is have an informational conversation to understand what your goals are, and then we work on a plan. What we do as coaches is check in on your progress. And if your goals have changed as we go along, and we may extend it, we may sometimes end early. I've ended coaching client arrangements early when people achieve their goals early, because that's not in service of you to just keep you coming back. Oh, and coaching question. So what do you think coaching can offer you? And I'm not putting you on the spot.
Well, I think the proper confidence and, just I have a host of things, but I would say confidence would be a big one. I like the idea of bringing in a diversity perspective, so it'd be nice to have a second perspective on
So, cool. Thanks, Amber. Thanks for being our guinea pig on the experiment.
So a question that I have, trying to think of how to say this easily. I have challenges with this growth model, whatever economics model you call that, right? Where grow. And I've been reading this book about donut economics, which is about sort of more sustainable, right? So something that I personally have a difficult time with is where to place myself in the world where I'm not making the world more messed up than it already. Like, how can I be part of the solution and not part of the problem? And you can answer this from a coaching perspective or whatever, but I just wonder about that, is that, because I know that part of it is fear, but I also know part of it is mindfulness on my part. And so I'm just wondering, that's my question, it's kind of weird, vague, but there you go.
No weird questions here, by the way. None are weird. It's a great question. So I'm not turning this on as a question to you, because technically I don't have that answer. I think only you can have that answer. And again, decide if you want to put it in your pocket or if you want to respond. Where do you think you want that place to be? Where do you have the greatest impact? I heard you say something about minimal sort of damage. You didn't use the word damage, but you want to have positive impact, but you worry also about the negative impact. How do you focus more on the positive impact? And where do you want that to be?
Yeah, I think for me, storytelling, the sort of the praxis part of education and social justice and arts are kind of that's my wheelhouse. So like helping people to see that, and I think part of it is to not be negative about it, because I mean like there's so much crashing in on this right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to connect. So I think it's connection. It's a really good question. It's a way of how to get people connected with ideas and with each other. Is kind of what I'm about.
You also mentioned mindfulness at the end of your statement, and mindfulness is key to allowing yourself to recognize that the negative thought may be there, but to release it and not let it overcome what you're thinking. Great question. Go ahead.
I manage a team of staff that are diverse in ages, and one theme that I kind of see is a thread of fear of failure and fear of change, and almost to the point where it's like a little debilitating in innovation. And I'm wondering if you have any insight or in the Innovators Toolkit on how to support that as a leader in an organization.
Usually, thanks for sharing that question. Fear of failure can come from a lot of things, and if it's within a group, so it's not just one person, there's something cultural usually going on. And if it's, to try to break that apart. So you hear me say that a lot of this is about breaking the problem apart to understand the different pieces and what contributes. And then the scientific analytical brain of mine would be what percentage is contributed by what thing. So if something is like, hey, people don't feel they can trust the risk or think that their careers will be impacted, like understanding the why is half of unlocking the fear of failure. But if it's systemic across a culture, understanding what leads to that, why are people staying safe and beyond safe but sort of really close, they're in survival mode more than anything. So really understanding the why helps unlock that. And then there's some tools out there, some of the readings, even the innovation guide from Harvard Business Review could be helpful. It might inspire some ideas. But Daring Greatly especially, we'll talk to that, I think.
I have a much more technical question. For innovation, you mentioned that it's really important to get feedback early, iterate on the feedback. When you are working on a product that has a pretty niche market of people that are very, very busy, particularly in the B2B space, how do you get people to give you that feedback, in particular early on?
It's a great question. My first question to you, before answering your question, is do you at least know who the top people are, who you would talk to if they could give you the time?
I could probably, I could identify those people.
And if you did, do you think that they would value giving up some time for a better product? Is there some value that they get in exchange? Either some insight or there's something you can offer them as a result?
Yeah, that's where I'm struggling, because I feel like, our field is so saturated with salespeople. First of all, I would have to figure out how to differentiate from that so they don't feel like I'm trying to sell them something.
Yeah.
And then if I break through that barrier, it's like, well, these are people that are so busy that it's going to be hard to, like, what value do I offer them to make up for half an hour of their time?
Half an hour in the end does feel precious. I appreciate that. But I also think people want the best product for them. People may be more willing to give you time just by asking, and they may feel honored and privileged to give you that input. What happens if you just try?
So far, nobody responded.
What if you try again?
I could try that, yeah.
It can actually feel like a big barrier, especially when you're trying to sell or if you're in a space where someone else does the work. But you might also know who your partners are to be your sort of early adopters or evangelize your stuff. That may help you as well.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I add to your response?
Absolutely.
Because I think it's even calling again and trying again. What if you innovated how you were engaging them?
Yeah.
Right? What about a 1-minute video clip that let them click on a link and you didn't need 30 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we tend to innovate out there in product, but not innovate how we play.
Yeah.
I've seen Johnny in the room, right, who makes videos. So there's this little thing around this 2-minute story. Can you get that? And might I click?
And more important, to that point, thank you for adding, Tina. I think more importantly, it's like, why do you think they're not responding? And again, breaking that apart. Is it that you need to provide something else? Is it that it got lost in the requests? And I think we talked a bit about with Kimberly's question, how do you break apart the positive from the negative and be mindful of the negative and the questions, and then tell yourself, is that really true? And ask yourself, what else can I try? Yeah, I love that. That's great.
I wanted to ask you that as well. I think you said something that's key. We're really creating innovative with so much salespeople. How do you differentiate? And as soon as you said that, I just thought about, being the opposite and maybe trying to position yourself as a partner versus like you're trying to sell you something. So story. And then obviously the format's important as well, and how you start bringing these pieces together and have a fun approach.
What I like about that idea, Carol, is that it's also about being invested in their success. And how you tell it, to Tina's point, is going to hone in. Maybe they'll be more responsive. And maybe won't, sometimes we get it wrong, but the effort can actually take you far. The attempt. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Go ahead, Dan.
Often I've spoken to innovators, and one of the biggest barriers to innovation often is cash flow. When you're trying to get somewhere and you've put your heart and soul into something, cash flow is stopping your tracks. A lot of innovators I've spoken to, either you find out that the reason they come to your attention or something that they're doing, that's not really their big idea, or if it is, they had something else that managed to get them through the period to deliver what they could do now, as what you recognize for, which is often something that it's like how you keep, once you've got a bit of momentum going and you're into the process a little bit, how do you keep that momentum going? Just like experiences that you've had with innovators and that sort of space and dealing with that crunch that often comes once you jump off the ledge to the cash flow.
Totally. It's a great question, and there's no easy solve to that either. As we've talked about, that was a common thread across all of the innovation profiles you saw. So it's real. I don't want to suggest it's not. The reason it wasn't on the barriers list is you can't control it, but there are things you can do to prepare. And I don't assume to pretend that this is easy, right? Being mindful of what your expenses are. So let's put a simple A/B sort of comparison. If someone jumps off the ledge and didn't put a plan together versus someone who put a plan together, who's more likely to succeed? Probably, most likely, I'd bet on the person B. But even person B can fail. So what leads to that? Did you check in? Do you know all the inputs? Have you collected all the feedback? Do you see the data and see what's happening? Do you either personally or through others have the capacity to go ask, whether it's through investors or funders or volunteers or donors? And be creative about how. Again, I don't presume this is easy, but speaking to Teen Techs, especially because they're in the room, you guys are finding ways to get the talent you need without paying for a developer on staff. And that's super creative, right? And to still be able to and people are passionate about contributing to your business, so engaging them. We talked about how do we sell people on your ideas and pull them in. Pulling people in and engaging the right people and just not being afraid. And staying, we talked a bit about, you responded also, that the staying curious allows you to just go try and not be afraid of the no. But just keep talking to people. We talked about community and connection and partnership. Those kinds of things help you feel okay and stay resilient, right? When you get a no or you feel like discouraged, right? Because that might happen in the journey. I shouldn't say might, it probably will happen. Yes, it's happened. But yeah, great question, Joe. I think I'm failing my experiment. I owe you a question now. I'm evaluating my process as I go. So Dan, what would your take be on the cash flow? How would you think about that differently or similarly?
I think that's where, Billy, you mentioned build the right support. Sometimes it may just take a change in your perception of how to look at the situation. Often if you've either got somebody who's already been through an experience that you can turn to, or just somebody, as you said, that can actually, you've probably already got the answer there, it just sometimes it's helpful to pull that out of you when it comes out of your own mouth.
That's actually a great comment. On that, even when so there are two sort of sides of that to simplify. Some people know, like the cash flow, or hey, I'm self-aware about this thing and I'm really worried about it and I don't know what to do. That's insight. The initiative is the next part. For people who aren't self-aware of the problem, or they know the problem but they don't know the stuff that surrounds it, or either aren't able or are afraid to break it apart, or too proud and not listening, or feel really so strongly and so convinced that they don't go deeper, right? That's where I think people get the blind spots put up. So that's where coaching in a safe place where someone's in your corner versus, say, a mentor who might come with, hey, here's my journey, here's what I've done. And actually really hard, again, Matt had shared, the reason he stayed away from the advice was not because he didn't value it, it's because he knew inherently that people who are advising you are coming from their perspective. And when you're asking for advice, they're gonna give you advice. They're not saying, well, not everyone's a trained coach either, to say, well, what do you think is right for you? What do you need? Would that work for you? People often aren't pausing with those questions. So I think, a lot of it is to sort of allow yourself that freedom. Sometimes it creates a little fear, but how do you unlock that? Some people just need to listen to a podcast. Some people need to read an article. Other people want to talk to someone to unlock it in a safe place. and then take the steps safely, experiment one foot in front of the other. But there's a host of tools out there for those reasons. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have any personal experience or literature around big business versus startups versus nonprofits and the way they have different challenges when it comes to innovation? I know like Baylor, for example, has an MBA program just for family business because it presents so many unique problems. And would you say that they, one may have more resources, but there are trade-offs with being in a big business?
Yeah, it's a good question, Amber. In terms of resources, I actually will poll the room in a moment to see if others have good guidance. I have worked both for smaller organizations. Working with Teen Techs as a small organization, and also have worked in large corporations. And I have found the common thread actually tends to be stage of innovation in that organization versus size of organization. But the mix of what's important and what challenges you face may be different. You could be at a large corporation with a host of resources but still face a funding problem. You could be in a small organization and have great funding because you've been practical. Or you may just be frugal as an organization. Amazon has frugality as a principle. So they don't just throw a bunch of money at it. They actually have you put a business plan together and an operational plan and think it all through before they say, here you go, here's a team, which is very thoughtful. So you're not generally, doesn't mean things don't happen or things don't get canceled, but then when you're recruiting people, you're very thoughtful that this is approved and ready to go. That's just one reaction, but so the themes may be a bit different, but there's some commonality across based on stage of innovation. Anybody else, though, have some guidance on what you've seen that's helpful, either how to identify and understand how to navigate differences across innovation, organization, size? We'll keep looking, and we'll see if there's something for you. Thanks for the question. How would you find out?
Oh, well, so I've worked for big business and also, small family businesses. And that was really interesting that you say that it's where they are in the stage of innovation. Because I would have assumed that there are trade-offs.
Yeah, there can be, but I think culture, organization, how healthy it is, how they manage, all play a role, definitely. And I found as I was going through the innovation journey, again, accidental innovator, so to speak, I found that what was more curious for me, I love developing things, so I was just telling someone I was coaching yesterday who's in a career transition. Early in her career, I was telling her I was always deemed myself the executor, not the idea generator, and kind of took pride on that, but also was afraid to take the risk to generate ideas that could be laughed at, or people would say, no, that won't work. And then as I got myself more and more into the innovation space, I had less fear, and I took more risks, and I was able to, and I'm more able and confident to debate even when I don't have all the answers. Doesn't mean I'm always right, but I think that the journey has been interesting, and it allowed me to move out of the place where I said I'm the executor to, hey, maybe I do have some ideas, and I can put some faith behind them and take some risks. So I think in part, where you think about yourself on the innovator's journey personally, and what role can you play in driving, encouraging people, inspiring them, and where you might need some extra guidance could help you, whether it's, hey, I just want some tools, I need some knowledge. But yeah, I think the journey itself can play a huge role. We're almost at time. Do we have one or two more questions left, or everyone question out? Okay. Did everybody get at least one thing, one tool? Did anybody in the room have a barrier, not like say, I don't have any barriers? No? Oh, bummer. I was really hoping, I had a quip ready to go, but I'll spare you the bad joke. But guys, thank you. I am really glad that you're here today, and we're here all reinventing the planet, the places we work, and really happy to have you and appreciate your time and attention. If you have any questions or comments, I really welcome your feedback. And if this is interesting to you, glad to try to do more of these in the future. But thank you, appreciate it. And keep innovating.